maybe kind of a strange question, but can building green save time for people? I mean, I think it's a question that I ask because I can see it can, help the environment. It can help, save money. It can help, all sorts of other things. Is there some way it can save time as well?
There are things that we do that you could say build the building faster, but there's other things that we do that take longer. So I don't think that building green is any faster or slower than anything else. I think it's really smarter, more of a best practice way to do it. And the more, because we see it with our clients, the more they learn about it, the more it starts to make sense to them. And they inevitably always ask this question: why aren't all buildings built this way? And I don't have an answer for them. I mean, that confuses me more than anybody. But I think it's probably a good question to ask.
So let's see what other questions I have. I mean, it seems like there will be a lot of people out there who are building new homes or businesses that can think about building green from scratch. But as for the majority of people out there who are already living somewhere, when they say, okay, I'm inspired now, I want to get started, are there things they can do themselves, or do they need to go through all these resources? If you could name a handful of things that they could just go out to the local, hardware store or somewhere and just start, just get started before they even hire a professional, or other things.
Right. I think I named probably a lot of them, but just to rattle them off would be changing out your light bulbs to compact fluorescents or LEDs, something that uses a lot less energy.
Is there a preference you have between?
No, LEDs are still expensive, but the quality of the light is better, and they're dimmable. They're more easily dimmable, and they last longer. But compact fluorescents, the curly Q ones, still use less energy. And a typical light bulb is 90% heat, which is why you burn your fingers when you touch it, and 10% light. And a compact fluorescent is actually the reverse of that. It's 10% heat, which is why it doesn't really get hot, and 90% light, which is why it's so much more efficient. That alone, I mean, it sounds like a stupid thing, and you hear it all the time. And most people, I imagine, have done it already, maybe, but it's still important. The next thing would be looking at water use. So there's lots of different ways to do that. There's a box called the Aquas, which is $300 that essentially you can hook up to a sink and use that to collect the soapy water and run it to your just one toilet. It's a very simple thing to do. There's low-flow shower heads. There's one that uses half a gallon per minute instead of 2.5, and it's got this cool spray thing. It's called the Helix, which is quite cool. There's kind of easy things like that. There's sealing your ducts. We're losing 30% of your heating and air conditioning out of the ducts because they're leaky. If you seal them with a duct mastic, which is essentially like duct tape but made for ducts, you just kind of cover it up, and you'll see an immediate savings. There's those kind of easy things that everybody should be doing. There's looking at your water heater. A lot of people have it cranked up to 160 degrees, 140 degrees. It really only needs to be about 123, 125, just enough to kill off germs. And I mean, you get scalded with anything hotter anyway. And then installing a timer in your hot water heater, so it's only heating the water when you need it, because you probably only shower at certain times a day, probably in the morning, probably at night, and setting the timer appropriately. There are things like that that people could do that are easy, and then just a little trip to the hardware store.
Great.
And that's probably the best thing that everybody could do. Even more so than anything else, reducing the amount of energy you already use is far better than taking the bigger steps of putting solar panels on your roof, which is a big commitment, and doesn't cost you money, it saves you money.
Would it be possible to, beyond the health benefits and beyond the environmental benefits, to sell someone or tell them the idea that basically, hey, you should build green because really you are going to save money within, as an average, you're going to break even, versus what the other costs would have been within 2 months or 2 years or 10 years. I mean, is there a certain, because I often think about savings, and I'm trying to think, well, would I have to say to myself, is it going to take 10 years to break even, or
Oh, no. Most of the things that I'm talking about, you see a payback within the first year. There are kind of easier things that you can do, especially if you're remodeling, that pay for themselves in a matter of weeks. Adding extra insulation, more than the minimum, is something that is relatively cheap. In fact, insulation is probably the best thing you could do if you're building, or remodeling your house. And those are kind of things that pay back in weeks. But for the most part, we're usually seeing in the first year Some other things that we do pay back within 3 years. If it takes more than 5 years, then we usually leave it up to the client, because then it becomes a decision. Solar panels, for instance, are something that we have to ask them. Are you interested in doing it? And here's the numbers, and here's the payback. And